"Dad, this is everything," my daughter whispered, as she signed away my life savings to strangers I'd never trusted. $80,000. 40 years of early mornings and greasy hands handed over to her boyfriend's mother, a woman whose smile felt like a knife wrapped in silk. I watched my little girl, so bright and trusting, put her signature on what looked like a partnership agreement for her dream bakery. But I'm a mechanical engineer. I know how to read blueprints designed to fail. They thought I was just a worried old man who didn't understand business. They were wrong. While they celebrated with champagne, thinking they'd just scored the easiest payday of their lives, I was already designing something else entirely. A trap so perfect they'd walk right into it with their eyes wide open, begging for more. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 40 years learning exactly how to take things apart, and I was about to teach them that some machines once broken can never be fixed. Thank you for choosing to spend time with us today. My life savings were meant for flour and ovens, but instead they were stolen. Before we uncover how an old engineer turns the tables, if you appreciate stories where wisdom and family triumph over greed, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps us share more tales like this. Now let the story begin. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary filled my small house in Harrisonburg, a familiar comfort on a late spring Sunday. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains stood hazy and ancient, watching over our quiet lives. But inside, all my attention was on my daughter Elara. Her eyes, the same deep brown as her mother's, sparkled with a light I hadn't seen in years. The check felt thin in my hand, insignificant for what it represented. $80,000. 40 years of early mornings, greasy hands, and meticulous work on complex hydraulic systems. My entire retirement. I slid it across the polished oak table, the same table where she'd done her homework as a little girl. For the Blue Ridge spoon, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. Her gasp was worth every penny. She picked up the check, her fingers tracing the numbers like they were sacred text. "Dad, this is everything," she whispered, tears welling. "It's just a start, kiddo," I told her, my heart swelling with a painful, powerful pride. For a moment, it was just the two of us, honoring her mother's memory by building a dream. Then Tristan cleared his throat, pulling us back to the present. He sat beside Elara, his arm draped casually around her chair, his smile a little too smooth. He was a city boy, sharp suits and sharper talk, a stark contrast to our mountain town's quiet ways. "That's an incredible gesture, Silas," he said, his eyes lingering on the check. "A real legacy investment." I just nodded, my own smile feeling tight. I'd seen men like Tristan before, men who saw numbers and opportunities, not people. Throughout dinner, he'd peppered me with questions about my old job, my pension, the value of my house. It felt less like polite conversation and more like a survey. Elara, lost in her happiness, didn't seem to notice. She was already talking about ovens and display cases, her voice buzzing with excitement. I tried to share her joy, but my engineer's mind was flagging anomalies, small inconsistencies in Tristan's stories that didn't quite add up. "You know, my mother was so thrilled to hear about your gift," Tristan said, cutting a piece of chicken with precise movements. "She's drawn up a little partnership agreement for us, just to make everything official and professional." She held up her phone, showing me an email from Genevieve. "She's a former banker, Dad. She says this contract will protect my dream," Elara said, her eyes shining with misplaced trust. A cold dread, precise and unwelcome as a crack in a foundation, settled in my chest. Sleep didn't come easily for the next 2 nights. The words partnership agreement echoed in my mind, a persistent low-frequency hum of warning. In my years as an engineer, I'd learned that catastrophic failures never began with a bang. They started with a hairline fracture, a single overlooked detail in a blueprint, a signature on a flawed document. Genevieve's contract felt like that fracture. I decided to talk to Elara on neutral ground. We met at a small coffee shop downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and the warm smell of cinnamon. She was already there, sketching designs for bakery logos on a napkin, her face bright with purpose. My heart ached. This dream was so pure, so fragile. I sat down, the worn wood of the chair creaking. "You look happy, kiddo," I started, keeping my voice light. She looked up, her smile brilliant. "I am. Tristan's mom is amazing, Dad. She's already found a potential location for the spoon." She pushed a cup of black coffee toward me, just how I liked it. I took a sip, the bitterness grounding me. "That's great. About his mom and the contract. I was hoping we could look it over together, just to have a second set of eyes on it." "It's standard practice, Elara." Her smile faltered, the light in her eyes dimming. She put her pencil down. "Why? You don't think I can handle it?" "Of course I do," I said, carefully choosing my words like I was walking across a weak bridge. "This isn't about you. It's about the paperwork. An $80,000 investment needs proper diligence. That's not trust, that's just being smart. It's about him, isn't it? She shot back, her voice low but sharp. The couple at the next table glanced over. You don't trust Tristan. The name hung in the air between us. I saw the defensive wall go up in her eyes, the same one I'd seen when she was a teenager, and I'd questioned her choice of friends. I had been right then, and a terrible certainty told me I was right now. I'm just trying to protect you, I said, my hands tightening around my mug. To protect your dream. By treating me like a child, her voice cracked, laced with a hurt that was like a physical blow. He supports me. He believes in me. Why can't you? She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm 25, Dad. I can read a contract. I'm meeting with them to sign it this afternoon. She gathered her things, her movements jerky with anger and disappointment. I wanted to stand up to pull her back, to make her see the danger I felt so acutely in my bones. But I was frozen. I had approached this like an engineering problem with logic and caution. I had forgotten it was a matter of the heart, her heart, and I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, the little bell above the door chiming her departure. I had just created the one thing I was trying to avoid, a space between us. A space that I knew with chilling certainty Tristan and Genevieve would be more than happy to fill. The drive home was a blur of green foliage and familiar storefronts that I barely saw. The cheerful bell on the coffee shop door seemed to echo in my ears a sound of finality. I had played my hand, and I had lost. Now all that was left was the waiting. It was a feeling I despised more than anything. As an engineer, I solved problems. I took things apart, identified the stress points, and reinforced them. But this was a problem I couldn't touch. I went to my workshop in the back of the garage, the one place I could usually find clarity. The air smelled of oil and sawdust. An old grandfather clock I'd been meaning to fix for a neighbor stood in the corner, its pendulum still. I opened its case, my tools laid out in their usual perfect order. My hands, usually so steady, felt clumsy. I picked up a small gear, but my mind wasn't on the delicate mechanics. It was in an office somewhere downtown, watching my daughter sign her future away. The minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. I tried to focus on the clock's intricate workings, but all I could see was Elara's hurt, angry face. Had I pushed too hard, had my caution honed over a lifetime of seeing things break, become the very force that would break my own family? The thought was a bitter pill. I put my tools down, the silence of the workshop pressing in on me. I walked back into the kitchen and made a pot of coffee I didn't want. The house felt empty, hollowed out. I stared out the window at the steadfast mountains, their peaks solid against the afternoon sky. They had stood for millennia. They had perspective. I had none. I was just a father terrified of a danger he couldn't name but could feel in his gut. Just after 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the counter. My heart seized. It was Elara. I let it ring twice before answering, trying to compose my voice. Hey, kiddo. Her voice came through the line, bright, almost bubbly, and utterly oblivious to my turmoil. Dad, we did it. It's all signed. The Blue Ridge Spoon is officially a partnership. She laughed, a sound that was usually my favorite music, but now it felt discordant. Genevieve even brought champagne to celebrate. She's taking us out to dinner tonight. I leaned against the counter, the cool granite, the only solid thing in my world. The hairline fracture I had dreaded was no longer a fear. It was a fact. The seal was broken. The system was compromised. That's great, Elara, I managed to say the words, feeling like lies in my mouth. I'm happy for you. We hung up a few moments later. I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, the phone still in my hand. It was done. They had her signature. They had my money. And they had her trust. My anger hadn't arrived yet. In its place was a chilling absolute clarity. The kind an engineer gets just after the bridge has collapsed, standing in the wreckage, already starting to calculate the forces that brought it down. The sun rose over the Blue Ridge peaks the next morning, but I didn't see the beauty. I saw a problem to be solved. The grief and helplessness from the day before had burned away overnight, leaving behind the cold, hard wiring of my 40 years as an engineer. There was a catastrophic failure in progress, and the first step was to acquire the schematics. I dialed Elara's number before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I forced a warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. Morning, kiddo. Hope the celebration was nice. It was amazing, Dad, she said, her voice still buzzing with yesterday's excitement. Genevieve has so many great ideas. I'm sure she does, I said, keeping my tone even. Listen, I was thinking, since I'm your first investor, I'd love a copy of that partnership agreement. Just for my records. I want to understand the business I'm backing. There was a slight pause. Oh, okay, sure. I can email it to you. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, I lied smoothly. Just an old man wanting to keep his paperwork in order. I'm proud of you, Elara. The last part wasn't a lie, and it made the rest easier to say. Minutes later, a notification pinged on my laptop. The email was there. Subject Spoon Partnership Agreement. I opened the attachment, a 12-page PDF, and printed every single page. I needed to feel it to hold the evidence in my hands. In my workshop, I cleared my workbench, sweeping away sawdust and stray screws. I laid the pages out in a neat row like panels in a complex hydraulic system. This was Genevieve's machine, and I was going to find out how it worked. I put on my reading glasses and picked up a red pen. For the first hour, I just read. I absorbed the dense legal language, the labyrinth of clauses and subclauses. It was expertly crafted, designed to look standard and professional to an untrained eye. But my eyes were trained to spot stress points. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew how to read a blueprint designed to fail. And the flaws were there. They were subtle, buried in vague language. Phrases like operational discretion granted to the managing partner. The managing partner, of course, was listed as Genevieve Sterling. Tristan was designated head of marketing and development. Elara was simply the head baker. Then I found the first major crack in the foundation. It was on page 7, section 4B. It gave the managing partner unilateral authority to restructure company finances, including seeking external loans using company assets as collateral. The clause that was supposed to protect Elara's dream had just given Genevieve the legal right to gamble it away. My pen circled the paragraph, the red ink like a drop of blood on the page. I leaned back, the wood of the chair groaning. It was worse than I thought. This wasn't a partnership, it was a heist. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the supportive, hands-off father. I listened as Elara chattered excitedly on the phone about potential paint colors and flooring samples. She was so consumed by the creative details, the tangible parts of her dream, that she remained blind to the silent, invisible machinery working against her. I let her have that fragile happiness. I needed to gather more data before I shattered it. Patience was a tool just like a wrench or a caliper. I had learned to use it well. During that time, I asked Elara for online access to the business bank account. My excuse was simple and plausible. I just want to follow along with the progress, I'd told her. See my investment at work. Oblivious and trusting, she gave me the username and password without a second thought. Every evening after she'd gone to her small apartment, I would log in from my workshop. For the first week, the transactions were exactly what I expected. A deposit for the lease on a small storefront on Main Street. A payment to a restaurant supply company for used ovens. My $80,000 being put to work as intended. A part of me, the father part, hoped I was wrong. Hoped my engineering mind was seeing fractures where there were none. That hope died on a Tuesday night. I logged in as usual, the workshop quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. I scrolled through the recent transactions and my eyes froze. A wire transfer. It had cleared that morning. The recipient was not a contractor or a supplier. It was Sterling Automotive Classics. The amount was $32,000. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my chest. Sterling Automotive, a high-end dealer of vintage sports cars over in Charlottesville. I knew the place. They sold beautifully restored machines to wealthy hobbyists. Not bakery equipment. My hands moved with a mechanical calm. I clicked for more details, printed the transaction record. The wire had been authorized by the managing partner, G. Sterling. Of course, it was all perfectly legal according to the document she had signed. Elara's dream, my life savings, had just paid for a toy. Tristan's toy. I remembered his slicked back hair, his talk of appreciating assets. I saw his mocking smile in my mind. Tell your dad he designed his own ruin. The words from my own premonition came back to me, sharp and venomous. He hadn't just been speaking figuratively. He had meant it literally. I pinned the printed bank statement to the corkboard in my workshop, right next to the pages of the contract. The evidence was mounting. The red circle I drew around the $32,000 transaction wasn't just a mark on a page. It was a declaration of war. My patience had served its purpose. Now it was time to design a different kind of machine. Not one that builds, but one that dismantles. Knowing what I knew, I couldn't let another day pass. The foundation of Elara's dream wasn't just cracked. It was actively being dismantled. I drove to her apartment that evening, the printed bank statement tucked into a manila folder on the passenger seat. It felt as heavy as a tombstone. She opened the door, surprised to see me. Dad, what's up? She was wearing an apron dusted with flour, and the apartment smelled sweetly of vanilla and cinnamon. She'd been testing recipes. My heart twisted. She was building while they were stealing. We need to talk, kiddo, I said, my voice quiet. The seriousness in my tone must have registered. She led me to her small kitchen table, wiping her hands on her apron. Is everything okay? I didn't waste time. I slid the folder across the table. I've been looking at the business account. She opened it, her brow furrowed in confusion. I watched her eyes scan the page, then stop. I saw the exact moment she read the words, Sterling Automotive Classics. I saw the flicker of disbelief followed by a dawning, sickening comprehension. Her face went pale. $32,000, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What is this? It's a car, Elara, I said gently. A vintage convertible. The wire was authorized by Genevieve yesterday. She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. Number. No, there has to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. Tristan said they needed to secure some assets for the business. Her voice was thin, desperate, trying to build a rational bridge over an impossible canyon. What kind of asset for a bakery is a two-seater sports car? I asked, keeping my voice level though every protective instinct in me screamed. Tears welled in her eyes as the last of her denial crumbled. She stared at the paper, at the stark, undeniable proof of the betrayal. It was the moment every parent dreads, the moment you have to stand by and watch your child's heart break, knowing you can't fix it. You can only be there for the aftermath. He told me, she started, her voice breaking into a sob. He told me that money was for a high-capacity mixer from Europe. He said it had to be wired through a specialty importer. The lie was so blatant, so insulting in its simplicity. They hadn't even tried to be clever. They didn't think they had to be. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The sound of her crying filled the small apartment, a raw, wounded sound that tore through me. I moved around the table and put my hands on her shoulders. She leaned into me just like she had when she was a little girl who'd fallen off her bike. But this was a different kind of pain. Scraped knees heal. A shattered trust leaves scars that are much harder to see and far deeper. I held her my own anger, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The heist was no longer a secret. It was out in the open, and the first casualty was my daughter's heart. The sobs eventually subsided, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. I made Elara a cup of chamomile tea, my hands moving with a steady purpose that I didn't entirely feel. She sat huddled on her small sofa, wrapped in a quilt her grandmother had made, looking small and fragile. The sweet smell of her test baking now seemed like a cruel joke. She stared into the steam rising from her mug. I'm so stupid, she whispered, her voice hoarse. How could I have been so stupid? I sat down in the armchair across from her. You're not stupid, Elara. You're trusting. There's a difference. I leaned forward, making sure she met my eyes. Your instinct is to see the good in people. That's a gift. Don't ever let people like them take that away from you. The mistake wasn't in trusting. It was in not verifying. That's a lesson you only need to learn once. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. What are we going to do, Dad? A switch flipped inside me. The comforting father receded and the engineer took over. We are not going to get angry, I said, my tone shifting, becoming more precise. Anger is a messy, inefficient fuel. We are going to be methodical. We are going to be patient. And we are going to treat this like any other engineering problem. I retrieved the folder from the kitchen table and sat beside her, spreading the contract and the bank statement out on the coffee table. This is a machine Genevieve built, I explained, tapping the contract. It's designed to do one thing: transfer wealth from us to them. Our job is to understand the machine so we can find the kill switch. Her eyes, red-rimmed and weary, followed my finger. But it's a legal contract. What can we do? Every machine has a tolerance, a point of failure, I said, and every criminal makes mistakes. They got greedy with the car. That was their first mistake. It gave us data. I looked at the pages, at the complex web of deceit. But I'm a mechanical engineer. I understand systems, not financial law. We need someone who can read this language, someone who can follow the money. I thought for a moment, my mind scrolling through a Rolodex of old colleagues and contacts built over 40 years. One name stood out. A man I'd trusted for decades. I pulled out my phone. There's a man I know in Richmond. His name is Marcus Thorne. He's a forensic accountant, the best I've ever seen. I dialed his number, the familiar digits, a comfort. Elara watched me, a flicker of something new in her eyes. Not hope, not yet, but a sliver of strength. Marcus picked up on the second ring. Silas, it's been a while. It has, Marcus, I said, my voice low and steady. Listen, I have a situation here. I'm sending you a blueprint for a heist. I need you to tell me how to take it apart. I spent the next 2 days in my workshop disassembling the old grandfather clock. My hands needed a problem to solve a system to put back in order. It was how I managed the chaos churning inside me. I'd check on Elara twice a day. She was quiet wounded, but the raw despair was slowly being replaced by a fragile resolve. She was my daughter. She was a fighter. She just needed a shield, and I was building one. My phone rang on the third day. The caller ID read, Thorn Analytics. I wiped the grease from my hands and answered. Marcus. Silas, his voice was grim, all business. I've read your blueprint. It's a nasty piece of work. Elegant in a predatory way. What did you find? I asked, leaning against my workbench. Your instincts were right. The contract is an ironclad trap. It establishes a limited liability company where your daughter is a minority partner with zero voting rights on financial matters. Genevieve Sterling has insulated herself perfectly. The car purchase was brazen, but she was well within her legal authority, as defined by the document. I closed my eyes. It was one thing for me to suspect it, another to hear it confirmed by an expert. So she can just bleed the account dry, she could, Marcus said, and I heard the rustle of papers. But that's not the end game here. Bleeding an $80,000 account is small time. Genevieve Sterling is not small time. The car was an act of arrogance. The real machine is much bigger. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Look at Section 7, subsection C. The clause about using company assets as collateral. They're not just spending your money, Silas. They're using it to create a legitimate-looking business. The lease the equipment purchases, it's all groundwork. They're building a clean financial history for the bakery. To what end, I asked, though a cold, sickening realization was already dawning on me. To secure a much larger loan, Marcus confirmed. A small business administration loan, most likely. They can apply for up to $250,000 with a new enterprise that looks this promising on paper. Once the loan is approved, they'll liquidate the funds, default on the loan, and disappear. The shell company will declare bankruptcy, and the debt will fall on the only remaining partner with a local address and a conscience, your daughter. The sheer viciousness of it took my breath away. They weren't just stealing my past. They were planning to ruin Elara's future. It's a powerful engine they've built, Marcus continued, his voice low. But it has a flaw. To get that loan, they need to look successful, and they need to do it fast. Their own greed is the weakness in the design. They will get impatient. A single point of focus emerged from my anger. A target. So, how do we stop them? We don't stop them, Marcus said, a hint of steel in his voice. We let them run the engine, and we build a better trap. We give them exactly what they're looking for, more fuel. That night I sat down with Elara again. The air in her small apartment was still heavy with grief, but it was no longer the chaotic storm of the day before. It was a quiet, cold fog. I knew what I was about to tell her could either send her back into that storm or burn the fog away for good. I laid it all out piece by piece, just as Marcus had explained it to me. I used simple terms, avoiding the legal jargon. I told her about their plan to build up the bakery's profile, the SBA loan they were likely targeting, and the final brutal goal of leaving her buried under a mountain of debt. I didn't soften the blow. She deserved the full, unvarnished truth. As I spoke, I watched her face. The initial sadness deepened into a hollow look of shock. Her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea trembled. So, the bakery was never real, she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. It was all just a stage. The dream was real, Elara. Your dream, I corrected her gently. They just hijacked it to use as a tool. They don't just want my money, she said, more to herself than to me. They want to ruin me. They want to make sure I can never recover, never rebuild. Yes, I said, my voice flat and hard. That's the design. She was silent for a long time, staring at the grain of the wooden table. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind, processing the sheer malice of it all. I waited, giving her the space she needed. This was her crossroads. She could remain a victim, or she could become a survivor. Finally, she looked up at me. The last of her tears were gone, her eyes were clear, and in their depths I saw a cold fire I hadn't seen before. It was the same look her mother used to get when faced with an injustice. So what do we do? She asked. Her voice was steady now, stripped of its earlier fragility. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Marcus says their greed makes them impatient, so we're going to give them what they want. A bigger, faster opportunity. We're going to build a better trap, Elara, but I can't do it without you. I need you to play your part, to pretend nothing is wrong. Can you do that? This was the most important question. I was asking her to walk back into the lion's den to smile at the man who had shattered her heart, to play along with the woman orchestrating her ruin. She didn't hesitate. She pushed her cup aside and leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. The gesture was one of decision, of commitment. "Okay, Dad," she said, her voice imbued with a strength I hadn't heard in years. "Tell me the first step." The first step was the hardest for Elara. I instructed her to call Tristan, to act apologetic for being distant, and to reaffirm her trust in him and his mother. Every word was a carefully calibrated performance. I sat beside her as she made the call, my hand resting on her shoulder. Her voice trembled at first, but she found her strength playing the part of the devoted, slightly naive fiancé perfectly. It was a flawless execution. They bought it completely. With Elara back on the inside, Marcus and I began to design the trap. We spoke every night, our conversations a mix of financial strategy and engineering principles. "They're building a system designed for a single massive payout," I told him, during one call pacing my workshop. "We need to introduce a variable they can't resist, something that forces them to accelerate their timeline and expose their hand." "A catalyst," Marcus agreed. "I've been looking into Genevieve's history. She was fired from her banking job for pushing clients into high-risk, unapproved investments. She's not just greedy, she's an adrenaline junkie. She loves the thrill of the big score. That was the key. We wouldn't offer them a safe bet. We'd offer them a jackpot, something so dazzling it would blind them to the risks. The plan we devised was simple in its concept, but complex in its details. We would create a fictional angel investor, a wealthy restaurateur from New York, looking to expand into boutique markets. This investor would express a sudden passionate interest in the Blue Ridge spoon, seeing it as a model for a nationwide chain of artisanal bakeries. He would offer to not just pay off their future SBA loan, but to triple their initial investment. "The offer has to be overwhelming," Marcus stressed. "But it needs a condition, a test of their financial solvency. He'll require them to consolidate all their liquid assets into a single escrow account for a 48-hour verification period. That's our window." The plan was solid, but it hinged on one critical component: the angel investor. He had to be utterly convincing. I knew exactly who to call. Daniel Sterling, no relation, a bitter irony, was an old friend from my first engineering firm. He'd left engineering to become a wildly successful venture capitalist in New York. He was charismatic, sharp as a tack, and he owed me a favor from a long-ago project. I dialed his number, my heart beating, a steady, determined rhythm. Silas Kessler Daniels' voice boomed through the phone, full of the same energy I remembered from 30 years ago. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Dan?" I said, getting straight to the point. "I need your help. I'm building a machine designed to catch a pair of thieves, and I need someone to play the part of the ghost in that machine." Daniel worked faster than I could have hoped. The next morning, an email arrived in my inbox. It wasn't from him, but a carbon copy of the one he'd sent to the generic info address listed on the Blue Ridge Spoon's fledgling website. It was a masterpiece of corporate charm. The email, sent from a holding company I'd never heard of, was concise and powerful. It praised the emerging artisanal brand identity of the bakery. It spoke of untapped market potential in boutique culinary spaces. It concluded by expressing a strong preliminary interest in a significant investment to accelerate growth. It was perfect, vague enough to be safe, but glittering with the promise of immense wealth. It was the perfect lure designed to catch the exact type of predator we were hunting. I forwarded it to Elara with a simple note. "This looks interesting. You should show it to your partners." Her role was to be the conduit, the unsuspecting bearer of good news. She played it beautifully. An hour later, she called me, her voice a carefully crafted mix of excitement and confusion. "Dad, you won't believe this. Some big investor from New York emailed the bakery. He wants to talk about expanding." "That's wonderful, kiddo," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the tension coiling in my gut. "What are Tristan and Genevieve saying?" "I just forwarded it to them," she said. "I'm waiting to hear back." Now came the test. The bait was in the water. We had to see if they would bite. Silas's trap is now set. Before he springs it, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think is the most crucial part of his plan? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The call came 3 hours later. It felt like 3 years. I was in my workshop sanding a piece of oak, the repetitive motion the only thing keeping my nerves steady. When my phone buzzed with Elara's name, I answered immediately. "They went for it," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Completely. Tristan is practically vibrating with excitement. He's already talking about a new headquarters, a corporate car." "And Genevieve?" I asked. "She was the one that mattered. She's trying to play it cool, Elara said, but I can hear it in her voice. She's hooked. She kept calling it a paradigm-shifting opportunity. She wants to schedule a call with Daniel's team for tomorrow. She's drafting a response right now. I closed my eyes, a slow breath escaping my lips. It was a feeling of grim satisfaction, like watching a complex machine you designed start up for the first time, its gears meshing exactly as planned. The pressure was building in their system, just as I'd anticipated. Their greed, their impatience, it was all working for us. The first phase was complete. The fish had not only seen the lure, it was chasing it with an open mouth. The conference call was scheduled for 10 the next morning. Daniel had insisted I be on the line, muted just to listen. "You need to hear them, Silas," he'd said. "You need to understand exactly who you're dealing with." I sat in my workshop, the phone on speaker, my hands clasped tightly on the workbench. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic from Daniel's end in New York. Then 2 more lines clicked in. "Daniel, a pleasure to finally speak with you." Genevieve's voice was smooth as polished granite, professional and controlled. "Tristan and I are both on the line. We were incredibly intrigued by your email." "The pleasure is all mine, Genevieve." Daniel's voice boomed, full of charisma and an easy authority that commanded respect. He was a natural. "I won't waste your time. My firm sees a diamond in the rough with your bakery. The branding is superb, the concept is scalable. We believe the Blue Ridge Spoon could be the next big name in artisanal comfort food. We share that vision," Genevieve said, her voice betraying a slight tremor of excitement. "Good," Daniel said, "because we don't do things by halves. We're prepared to offer a $250,000 investment to accelerate your national rollout. This would involve paying off any initial startup loans to clean the slate and injecting significant capital for expansion." I could almost hear Genevieve's sharp intake of breath. This was it, the jackpot. Daniel had just offered to pay off the very loan they were planning to steal. "That's a very generous offer," Tristan chimed in, unable to contain himself. "It's a standard offer for a brand we believe in." Daniel corrected him coolly, subtly putting him back in his place. "However, our board has a strict due diligence protocol. Before we proceed, we require our partners to demonstrate their own liquidity and commitment. We will need you to consolidate the company's current liquid assets into a single third-party escrow account for a 48-hour verification period." There it was. The core of the trap delivered flawlessly. A beat of silence. I held my breath. This was the moment she could balk, could sense something was wrong. But Genevieve's greed was stronger than her suspicion. "Of course," she said, her voice tight with the effort of sounding casual. "That's a perfectly reasonable request. We can have the funds transferred by the end of the week." "Excellent," Daniel said. "My assistant will be in touch with the details for the escrow account." "A pleasure doing business with you, Genevieve." The line clicked dead. I sat in the echoing silence of my workshop, my knuckles white from gripping the edge of the bench. Genevieve hadn't hesitated. She hadn't asked a single question about the escrow company or the terms. All she heard was the number, $250,000. She was so focused on the massive prize at the end of the maze that she couldn't see that the walls were already closing in around her. The next few days were a masterclass in patience. Marcus had set up the escrow account through a secure anonymous shell corporation. The details were sent to Genevieve. Now all we could do was wait for her to wire the money. It was like watching a complex hydraulic system build up to its critical pressure point. Any sudden move, any sign of our true intentions, and the whole thing could blow up in our faces. Elara was my eyes and ears. Her strength was remarkable. She continued to play her part, meeting with Tristan to discuss bakery business, all the while knowing the business was nothing but a prop. She called me every night to report. "It's disgusting, Dad," she said during one call, her voice a low, angry hum. "You should hear them. They think they've won the lottery." "What are they saying?" I asked, keeping my own voice steady. "Tristan is already shopping for a new apartment in New York. He talks about it like it's a done deal. He even had the nerve to ask me what color I wanted the kitchen to be." She made a sound of disgust, as if I would be going with him. "And Genevieve, she's worse. She's so smug." Today she told me that my rustic charm was a good starting point, but that the real professionals would be taking over soon to build a serious national brand. She said it was a good thing I had them to guide me. Otherwise I'd be stuck selling cupcakes in a small town for the rest of my life. The condescension, the sheer arrogance of it made my blood run cold. They weren't just stealing from her. They were mocking her, belittling her dream while they dismantled it. "Did she mention the transfer?" I asked, my focus sharp. "Yes. She said their business lawyer advised them that everything looks standard. They're liquidating the remaining funds in the account tomorrow morning. She said the money should be in the escrow by noon. Tomorrow. The word hung in the air. After weeks of planning of quiet anger and careful maneuvering, the final act was about to begin. "You're doing great, Elara," I told her, my voice full of a pride she couldn't possibly understand. "You've been incredibly brave. Just one more day." "I can do it, Dad," she said, her voice firm. "After what I heard today, I can do anything." After we hung up, I walked to the corkboard in my workshop. I looked at the contract, the bank statement, the flow charts of our plan. All the components were in place. All the safety checks were done. The machine was ready. Genevieve and Tristan thought they were on the verge of their greatest triumph. They had no idea they were walking up the steps to a perfectly engineered trapdoor, and their feet were already on the release lever. The morning air in my workshop was cool and still. I had a three-way conference call open on my phone, the line silent. Marcus was in his office in Richmond. Daniel was in his boardroom in Manhattan. I was at my workbench, staring at the live balance of the escrow account on my laptop screen. It read 0. Elara was playing her part, attending a final pointless meeting with Tristan about brand synergy. Her real job was to confirm when Genevieve left for the bank. At 11:15 a.m., a text from Elara came through. A single word, now. I took a slow, steadying breath. "She's on her way," I said into the phone, my voice calm. "My legal team is standing by," Marcus replied, his tone all business. "The moment the transfer is confirmed, we lock the account and file the injunction, and my office is ready to send the termination email," Daniel added. "The second the money is ours, the deal is dead." We fell silent again. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I watched the cursor blink on the screen. 0. It was a test of faith in my own design. I had calculated every tolerance, every stress point, but there was always the human element, the chance that Genevieve at the last second would feel a prickle of suspicion. Then at 11:37 a.m., the number on the screen flickered. My heart hammered against my ribs. The page refreshed. The balance was no longer 0. It read $48,315.22. The exact amount remaining from my initial investment after the lease and equipment costs plus the car. She had liquidated everything. "We have it," I said, my voice tight. "The transfer is complete." "Execute," Marcus commanded. The next 60 seconds were a blur of precise, coordinated action. I heard Marcus in the background giving orders to his team. "Lock it. File it. Now." On my screen, Daniel forwarded me the email his assistant had just sent to Genevieve. The subject line was cold and final, termination of investment inquiry. It stated that their due diligence process had revealed significant financial red flags and a clear misrepresentation of assets, and that their firm was withdrawing all interest effective immediately. "It's done," Daniel said. "She'll be getting that email right about now. And my team has just forwarded the complete evidence package to the fraud department at her bank," Marcus added. "The contract, the wire for the car, the recorded call, and the fact that she just tried to place all company assets into an unvetted third-party account. They're getting that now, too." I leaned back, the tension draining out of me, replaced by a profound, chilling sense of finality. The trap hadn't just been sprung. It had been vaporized. Genevieve Sterling had walked out of her bank believing she was one step away from $250,000. She had no idea that the phone in her pocket was about to inform her that she had just lost everything. I drove straight to Elara's apartment. I found her pacing in her living room, her phone clutched in her hand. The sweet smell of baking was gone, replaced by the sterile scent of cleaning supplies. She had been scrubbing her kitchen, channeling her nervous energy into work. "It's done," I told her simply as I walked in. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes wide. "The money's safe," I confirmed. "The account is frozen. The emails are sent. All we do now is wait for the fallout." We didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, Elara's phone shrieked to life. The screen lit up with Tristan's picture. Her hand trembled as she looked at me. I gave her a slow, reassuring nod. She answered and put the phone on speaker, placing it on the coffee table between us. "What is this?" Elara Tristan's voice was a high-pitched snarl, stripped of all its usual charm. "What the hell is going on? My mother just got an email. The deal is off." "What did you do?" I don't know what you're talking about," Elara said, her voice a believable imitation of confusion. "Don't lie to me," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "The escrow account is frozen. My mother is on the phone with the bank. They're talking about fraud. This has your father written all over it." Then another voice cut in, cold and venomous. "It was Genevieve. You and that senile old fool," she hissed. You think you're clever. You think you can steal from us. We have a legally binding contract. We will sue you for everything you have. The threat was so empty, so utterly impotent that I almost laughed. They were threatening us with the very weapon we had just dismantled. You don't have a contract, Genevieve, I said, my voice calm and clear, speaking for the first time. You have a confession, a signed confession detailing your intent to commit fraud. And that confession, along with every transaction, every recorded call, is now in the hands of your bank's fraud department. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears in her mind grinding to a halt as she processed the inescapable truth. The hunter had become the hunted. You'll regret this, Kessler, she finally managed to say, her voice dripping with impotent rage. No, Genevieve, I replied, my tone flat and final. You will. I reached over and ended the call, plunging the room back into a sudden, peaceful silence. Elara stared at the phone, her breath catching in a half-sob, half-laugh. It was the sound of a pressure valve finally being released. The storm had hit, and we were still standing. The wreckage was all on their side of the street. The weeks that followed were quiet. The loud, violent crash of the Sterling's scheme was replaced by the slow, grinding gears of legal and financial consequences. I didn't seek out the details, but they found their way to me through Marcus, who provided periodic, concise updates. The first domino to fall was the bank. Faced with the mountain of evidence Marcus had provided, they launched a full-scale internal investigation. Genevieve was not only facing charges from us, but from a financial institution whose trust she had violated. Her name was blacklisted in the financial world. Her career wasn't just over, it was scorched earth. Then came the car. The $32,000 vintage convertible. It turned out Tristan had bought it on credit using the company's account as a down payment and proof of funds. When the account was frozen and the company dissolved, the dealership repossessed it. I found a certain grim satisfaction in picturing Tristan's face as he watched his precious toy being towed away. Marcus's legal team, armed with the contract as a signed confession of intent, had filed a civil suit. It was an open and shut case. Faced with undeniable proof of fraud and coercion, the Sterling's lawyer advised them to settle immediately. They had no choice. A month after that fateful phone call, a check arrived at my house. It was for the full amount remaining in the account, plus legal fees and an additional sum for damages. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. The final update from Marcus came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my garden pulling weeds, the sun warm on my back. They're broke, Silas, he said, his voice devoid of any triumph. It was simply a statement of fact. To pay the settlement, they had to sell their apartment in Charlottesville. They're renting a small place on the outskirts of town. Tristan is working a retail job at the mall. Genevieve, well, no one will hire her. I looked out at the mountains, at the peaceful green of my yard. I felt no joy, no thrill of victory. Just a quiet, profound sense of order being restored. A system that had been dangerously out of alignment had been recalibrated. The forces of greed and arrogance had been met with an equal and opposite force of patience and precision. Thank you, Marcus, I said, for everything. Anytime, Silas. You built a solid case. I hung up and went back to my gardening, my hands in the soil. The weeds came out easily, their roots giving way. The consequences for the Sterlings were severe, but they were of their own making. They had designed their own ruin. I had simply read the blueprint and flipped the switch. A few days later, I invited Elara over for Sunday dinner, just like old times. The sharp, painful memories of that last dinner where this all began had started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. She arrived looking lighter than she had in months, the shadows of betrayal finally receding from her eyes. We sat at the old oak table, the settlement check resting between us. So I began sliding the check toward her. What do you want to do with this? She looked at it, then at me. I don't know, Dad. After everything, I'm not sure if I'm cut out for this. Maybe Genevieve was right. Maybe I am just a small-town girl who sells cupcakes. The lingering venom of Genevieve's words hurt me more than any financial loss. Don't you ever let her voice be the one you hear in your head, I said, my tone firm but gentle. She was wrong about everything, especially about you. I pulled the now infamous contract from a drawer and laid it on the table next to the check. This, I said, tapping the thick document, was your first real business lesson. It was expensive, and it was brutal, but the best lessons usually are. You've now seen the worst that can happen. You've seen how predators operate. You're not the same trusting girl you were 2 months ago. I'm not, she agreed, a newfound strength in her voice. Good, I said. Now, we're going to start over. The right way. We're going to find a local lawyer, someone we trust to help you set up your own company. A real one. We're going to read every line of every document together. And you are going to be the sole owner, the president, the one in charge. I pushed the check firmly into her hand. This is still your dream, Elara, not mine. It was always yours. You just had to learn how to build the walls a little higher. She stared at the check, then back at the contract, a document that had once been a symbol of her ruin. Now it was just paper. Its power was gone. She finally looked at me, and her smile was the brightest I had ever seen. It was a smile earned through fire. "Okay, Dad," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Let's build a bakery." We spent the rest of the evening not talking about the past, but sketching out a new future. We designed a new business plan, this one built not on naive trust, but on hard-earned wisdom. The money was just money. The real inheritance I was giving her was the lesson that had come with it, the knowledge that she could face the worst, and not just survive, but come back stronger, smarter, and ready to build her dream on a foundation that no one could ever shake again. A year later, I stood across the street from a small shop on Main Street. A beautifully carved wooden sign swung gently in the autumn breeze, bearing the name, the Blue Ridge Spoon. The scent of fresh bread and brewing coffee drifted out a warm and welcoming invitation. It smelled like victory. The grand opening was today, and the place was bustling. Through the large front window, I could see a crowd of familiar faces from town laughing and chatting, pastries in hand. The morning sun streamed in, glinting off the polished glass of the display cases, which were filled with an array of Elara's creations. Cinnamon rolls glistening with icing scones studded with cranberries and perfectly golden dock croissants. I watched my daughter behind the counter. She moved with a confidence that was entirely new. She laughed with a customer, effortlessly handled a complicated order, and directed a young employee with a calm, steady authority. She wasn't the same trusting girl who had signed a disastrous contract. This was a businesswoman, a proprietor, the sole owner of a thriving enterprise she had built with her own two hands on a foundation of hard-won wisdom. We had spent the past year meticulously rebuilding. We'd hired a local lawyer who had gone over every lease and vendor agreement with a fine-tooth comb. We'd created a solid business plan, and Elara had secured a small, legitimate startup loan from the community bank, based on the merit of her proposal, not on false pretenses. I was her advisor, her sounding board, but every final decision had been hers. I saw her glance up and catch my eye through the window. She gave me a wide, brilliant smile, the kind that reached her eyes and spoke of a deep, unshakable happiness. I smiled back, my heart full to bursting. I didn't go in right away. This was her moment, not mine. I just stood there on the sidewalk, another anonymous face in the crowd, watching my daughter live her dream. A dream that had been bought stolen and then reclaimed, stronger and more beautiful than before. The grandfather clock I'd been fixing last year now stood in a corner of the bakery, its pendulum swinging in a steady, reassuring rhythm. It kept perfect time, just like the slow, methodical process of justice. I thought of the Sterlings, a fleeting, distant memory. They were a necessary catalyst, a stress test that had forced a change in design. They had intended to create a ruin, but in the end they had inadvertently forged something unbreakable. My daughter's spirit. My legacy wasn't the money I had given her. It was the resilience she had discovered in herself. That was an inheritance no one could ever steal. After a few more moments of quiet observation, I crossed the street. The little bell above the door chimed the same sound that had once signaled Elara's angry departure from the coffee shop. Today, it sounded like a welcome. The warmth and cheerful noise of the bakery enveloped me. It was even better up close. The details were all Elara, small pots of local wildflowers on each table. The walls painted a warm, buttery yellow and a subtle scent of orange zest in the air. She saw me and her face lit up. She excused herself from a conversation and navigated the crowded room to meet me. She untied her apron, revealing the confident businesswoman underneath. "What do you think, Dad?" she asked, her voice full of a quiet, hard-won pride. "I think," I said, looking around at the happy faces and the beautiful pastries, "that your mother would be incredibly proud." Tears welled in her eyes, but these were not the tears of grief or betrayal I had seen before. These were tears of joy. "I think so too," she whispered. She led me to a small section of the wall near the counter. Hanging there in a simple oak frame was the first dollar bill they had earned that morning. Next to it was another frame containing the official business license from the state of Virginia. At the bottom, in clear, bold print, were the words, "Elara Kessler, sole proprietor." "I wanted you to see that," she said. "No partners, no fine print, just my name. It's the most beautiful thing in the whole shop," I told her, and I meant it. She took my hand. Thank you, Dad. Not just for the money, but for everything after. For teaching me how to fight back. For trusting me to do it right this time. I always trusted you, Elara, I said. I just needed you to learn how to trust yourself. She went behind the counter and returned with a small, perfect-looking almond croissant on a plate. The pastry was golden brown, flaked with toasted almonds. Your favorite, she said, placing it on a table for me. The very first one I made this morning. I saved it for you. I sat down, the cheerful hum of the bakery a perfect symphony around me. I took a bite. The pastry was light, airy, with a rich, buttery flavor. It was perfect. It tasted of resilience. It tasted of a dream that had been through the fire and emerged stronger. I looked at my daughter, a woman now standing tall in the center of the world she had built for herself. The check I gave her had started this journey, but it was her courage that had finished it. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was an engineer in her own right, a builder of beautiful things. And that was a legacy worth more than any amount of money. I finished the last bite of the almond croissant. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I watched Elara as she moved through her bakery, a place born from a nightmare but built into a dream. She was the heart of it all, a steady, shining center of warmth and creation. The customers came and went, each leaving with a smile and a small bag of something wonderful. They didn't know the story behind this place. They didn't know about the contract, the stolen money, or the intricate trap that had brought it all back. They just knew the bread was good and the coffee was hot. And that was the way it should be. The victory wasn't in the telling of the war. It was in the peaceful life that followed. The fine print that was meant to be my daughter's ruin had become her education. The trap designed to steal her future had instead given her one. It was the ultimate irony, the kind an old engineer could appreciate. Sometimes the only way to understand how a structure truly works is to watch it fail and then have the courage to build it back better. I left a $20 bill on the table, more than enough for the coffee and croissant. As I stood to leave, Elara caught my eye again and gave me a small wave. I nodded back, a silent conversation passing between us that no one else could understand. I walked out into the crisp autumn air, the little bell chiming my departure. My work was done. The most important blueprint I had ever worked on was complete. It wasn't a plan for a bridge or a dam, but for a life where my daughter was strong, wise, and the sole proprietor of her own destiny. That is the true inheritance. It's not the money you leave behind, but the strength you build in the people you love. It's the wisdom to see the kill switch hidden in the fine print of life, and the courage to flip it when you must. Thank you for experiencing this journey with Silas and Elara. The road to justice was paved with patience and a father's love. If this story of resilience and clever revenge touched your heart, we would be so grateful if you'd let us know by liking this video. Your comments are what inspire our next stories, so please share your thoughts below. And to ensure you never miss another tale, subscribe and become part of our community. Thank you for watching.